And like I mentioned before, when I do these sort of presentations, I oscillate between a more formal presentation, a PowerPoint presentation, and bouncing through things, versus a more hands-on, informal conversation. I decided on the latter for this conversation here, but it's useful in order to provide a bit of context behind these things. So, again, if you're unfamiliar with LibreText, it's a not-for-profit organization. It's co-run at the University of California, Davis, where I'm a professor of chemistry at. But it's also a not-for-profit entity that exists outside of my university, and that's necessary because I need to do things that are that the university won't allow me to do or makes exceedingly painful for me to be able to do. And anyone who's tried to operate within academia should probably appreciate that sort of issue. Uh, so. Um, the LibreText project was born 17 years ago when I was an assistant professor teaching a general chemistry class. At the same time, I was also teaching an upper divisional physical chemistry class for life sciences, and I adopted a book by a very famous physical chemistry textbook author, and it was exceedingly expensive. It was $200 per book, and it was the first edition of that book, and it was full of mistakes and errors. And I felt, in typical hubris fashion that assistant professors have, that I can try to change that process. Little did I know that I started going down a path that was windy, beneficial, exciting, and exceedingly time consuming. But I'm very happy to have done so. So we started that project as an open pedagogy project. And if you're unfamiliar with that term, it's basically using students in order to create non-disposable assignments. In other words, writing on topics that would be part of the textbook that I was going to be adopting. That was the mechanism that we were using to build with, because I didn't have money, but I did have lots of students, and students provide a great return on investment. Plus, this is actually very beneficial from a pedagogical perspective. Students can write on things and internalize things when they write, in contrast to just doing homework assignments and things like that. In fact, I'm even still doing that today in my chemistry class that I just got out of a couple hours ago, in which I have as extra credit where students are looking for the topics and how they relate to their identity, typically their geolocation, so the area around Davis, asking how we can apply various aspects of what we're dealing with, equilibria, phase diagrams, and things like that. And that right there is a useful mechanism in order to handle the construction of new material, especially things that are contextual, like what was mentioned earlier on, because students can have a better idea about what resonates with their identity than we do, because it's their identity, not ours. Okay, so anyways, I don't want to give a whole rehash of the history of the LibreText, or then it was called the ChemWiki, other than saying that we started to get investment of funds, both from the National Science Foundation, Department of Education. We received some funding from the U.S. Department, from the California Education Learning Lab. And that has expanded the scope of our project from just an open pedagogy project in chemistry into basically all of academia, with many different aspects associated with the LibreVerse, which is the ecosystem of technologies that you have access to with the account, the LibreOne account that hopefully you all have here. So when you have your account, if you click on a rocket ship, and this is being shown, right? People can see the screen that's the launch pad. Okay, thank you. Sometimes I never really know what Zoom is doing. Anytime you see a rocket ship, it will open up this infrastructure, this map of things, and it includes a range of technologies on here that we've talked about in numerous presentations this week, or will talk about, including the homework system, antecedent writing, Commons Conductor, Jupyter, Nova, Stoa, etc. We're not going to be discussing any of that stuff today. We're going to talk about the actual textbooks. We have 16 independently operating wiki technologies, or wiki instances. We chose wikis because it was the best technology for large-scale collaborative construction effort when we started. It's still the best technology for large-scale collaborative construction effort. And the idea behind a wiki, if you're unfamiliar with the actual philosophy behind it, is to make editing quick. Make it simple, reduce the amount of flexibility that you have in terms of creating content, typically on the internet, into a smaller set that's easier in order to master. In fact, if you're not familiar with the wiki term, is a Hawaiian term for fast. So if you go to the Honolulu airport, for example, and you get off the plane, you can have a bus that comes, and it's the wiki bus, and it will take you very quickly somewhere. I don't know. I've never taken it. Um, so that's the underlying technology that we have that hosts our content. Now, in the 17 years that we started, we have amassed somewhere in the order of about 1.5 million pages of OER content. So it's the largest single repository of OER textbook content on the internet today. The only thing that beats that would be Wikipedia. And it's a little hard to beat Wikipedia for a variety of reasons. But they're not textbooks, and they have a different philosophy in the way they have organized their structure. Now, why is that important? Well, when faculty come in, they can view the corpus of content that we have, whether they're books or individual pages that are constituting those books or separate to those books, and they can view it in a traditional fashion of saying, here's a book, I want to adopt it. So here is an OpenStax chemistry book, I adopt it. Here is a physics book, I adopt it, and you go. And that's a traditional way in which academia is largely addressed. But that is breaking, in part because we have flexibility. Now, that flexibility has started to pervade both the commercial textbook infrastructure and the non-commercial OER infrastructure that's out there. And the idea behind it is the ability to customize the books so that you can come in and you can capitalize on the displeasure as an instructor of your book and say, I want to add content to my book, or I want to remove content to your book. I don't know any faculty member that's 100% happy with the textbook in their class. They always want to do something with it. And that is what OER enables us. In other words, make something that is ideal for the class at hand, whether it's ideal for the instructor, ideal for the department, ideal for the students, in order to be able to advance that. And that right there really brings me a lot of I wouldn't say excitement, but enthusiasm over what OER is able to provide. More than just basically the fact that it's free and allows the opportunity for students to use money for more creative things like living and food and housing and other things like that, which are exceedingly important and will be exceedingly important in the next handful of years because both states and federal governments are usurping the status quo in terms of how money is being distributed. So anyways, so people can use the books that we have on our corpus. We have about 3,000 books, and they take them off and say, I want to adopt them. They can adopt them by just giving a simple URL to the book that's available online. That's fine. Or they can customize their own books. And invariably, customization involves remixing of existing material or adding in new material to existing books. And such. So if you're unfamiliar with the corpus of content that we have, if you go to the Commons, and you can see that from commons.libreTexts.org, it's equivalently our card catalog of what we're so you can come in, you can do a question and say, I want to do chemistry. And identify now 369 books have the word chemistry or connected to chemistry. Again, chemistry is the most mature field on our platform because that's what started everything. And you can come in and say, I want to look at various chemistry classes, or you can do searches, say chemistry context, organic chemistry, etc., in order to be able to advance that. And you can say something like, this advanced theoretical book, you can just basically give out the URL. This is looking now. This is the entry in our catalog, and this is the actual book itself. We're going to be focusing most of our activities on the book itself, which is easy to do or easy to find. And when I give my syllabi out to my students, I just paste in the URLs of the applicable book and say, here's the URL, ready to rock. You don't need to go into any bookstore infrastructure or anything else off of that. That's convenient. Or you can download a PDF if you want, or you can embed it into your learning management system. In California, we're all Canvas in all three of the systems, or all 150 of our campuses. And there'll be other export options available, including even being able to get a print copy of the book. We act as an intermediary to a print-on-demand service called Lulu, and I can indeed buy this book that is 398 pages, and it costs $20. And that's basically cost plus a little bit of administrative fees plus shipping in order to be able to process that. Any book that you host on our platform gets all the export options available, including this physical book aspect. But what we want to talk about is how to create these books from the material that we have at hand. And that uses, well, first you can think about that this can be a very daunting effort if you have 1.5 million pages of content to access. It could be even more daunting if you have content distributed in a handful of different sites in different platforms, or even the same platform on different campuses across the place. Like, for example, Pressbooks, if you have various things all over the place and you're not able to do a clear search, especially for subtopics or chapter levels that's there. So anyways, I digress. So let's get started with the actual primary tool for remixing that we have, which is what we call the remixer. And that's when I want to go about doing that. So before we can talk about remixer, we need to actually create a empty book in order to remix. So this is how we're going to go about doing this thing. I'm going to go back to the Launchpad. And again, I'm going to paste this into the chat. And when you sign in, you'll have your name up here. And if you have an avatar, you can go about doing this thing. This was a picture that a student of mine drew of me back when I had more color in my hair that I just run with and such. So this is what's going on. Before I can remix, I need to create an empty template of a book. Before I can do that, I need to create a conductor page. Now, at this point, I should emphasize what conductor page means. So I already showed you the Commons, the catalog system, that's the front end, where you can do searches through various books. Every LibreNet campus gets their own Commons. So for example, if I want to go to Cal State Monterey, I can do that and see a branded instance associated with this. Joy, you should be the administrator for this once I get it. And all the books that are in your bookshelf, meaning all the books that we host for your campus, will be outlined here. Right now, we don't have any books. I'm not sure if that's because we don't have any or we haven't added it to the bookshelves in order to show up there. But if you were to go to other instances, you'll be able to see that. For example, if I went to Bakersfield College, just because it's at the top of the list because it's B, I can then look and see its campuses. So these are 4 books that they have. Now, the more developed the program gets, the more books you have available to the relevant stakeholders and such. In fact, after this conversation, Coalinga College, which is a community college in the Central Valley, will be presenting what they've done. And in the 1 year that they've been working on here, they've actually fleshed out some on the order of 40 or 50 different books or remixes for their systems. They want to be the first community college in California that's 100% OER. They could do that because they're really small. So anyways, I digress. That's the catalog. However, if I click on Conductor, that is a project management tool. And this was a topic that was discussed yesterday in terms of empowering the construction of OER, but it's especially useful for OER programs that are trying to coordinate multiple projects simultaneously in order to advance. It's a project management tool. And if I click on here, it will go to the back end or the conductor. Now, for most of you, you're not going to have any entries here or any projects because it's completely new to you. That's perfectly fine. But what I want you to be able to do is to go to the conductor in order to be able to create the book. So please go to the conductor. I placed a link there if you don't want to go to the Launchpad, and give me a thumbs up when you're actually there. While we're doing that, I will read. Someone has here. Whoever iPhone happens to be, if 2 instructors use different are collaborating, you can list it on multiple campuses. Yes. So each campus commons has a set of administrators. The administrators are able to add any book they want to their campus commons. So for example, Joy can come in here and she can quickly flesh out her campus commons with hundreds of books if she wants, saying this is adopted, this is adopted, this is adopted, this is adopted, or this is important, or this is an author, and then quickly flesh it out. So I saw a bunch of thumbs and I see a bunch of thumbs, actually quite a multicolored set of thumbs in the chat. So I assume that we're doing here. The next step that we want to do is to create a conductor page. We insist on having a conductor project page for every project that's being done. That provides a mechanism for centralizing the communication around that project, but it provides an infrastructure in order to provide meta tags associated with that project. So I want you to click on this green button that says Create Conductor Project. And that right there will create a project, and you decide what the title happens to be for the project. So football is life, which is a beautiful title for this. I shall spell it in English. Okay. And then I have the ability in order to make this project public or private. For now, I'd like you to be private here, but if you make it public, you're basically putting it into the queue, into the collection, so that if I were to do a search for football, I could find out what project is being constructed or is under construction that deals with football. That's convenient in order to make sure that we can build upon each other's work. Capitalizing on the sharing is caring model associated with OER, so that if Joy is creating a book and I have an interest in order to use some of that book, I can then contact Joy and see if there's some sort of synergy so we can work together in order to move things forward. In other words, make it so that we're not doing a whole bunch of independent, duplicative work, but try to actually so we can work together for moving. So anyways, I'm going to keep this as private, and I'm going to create the project. So I want you all to create a project right now with a title, whatever you want and such. Whose iPhone, by the way? I don't want to keep on talking about Tim Rice here. Nicole. Nicole, you're new, so you didn't introduce yourself, but that's great. Is it possible to make a chapter available and keep the rest of the... It is possible in order to go about doing that. It requires a little bit more nuanced associated with it. The one way you can do, if you want, depending upon if you want that for publication, in other words, you want to use it in the classroom, or if you're using it for just reviewing, that you want a reviewer to come in order to be able to do these things, you may have an interest in order to just add a reviewer to your conductor page as an auditor, and they can just see what's going on and you can work with that. So depending upon how you want to go about doing it, you can actually control that. Okay. Chutney asks, I'm a librarian. I do not have a faculty link. How would I? Don't worry about it because Justin's verifying it right now, and then we're ready to go. Normally, what we would do is we ask you to provide a link to your library. We don't just give accounts out to faculty. And if you don't have any sort of online presence, then we ask to talk to or get some verification from someone else on your campus that says that you are what you are. And again, the point of this is not necessarily to limit the ability to remix, because typically it doesn't have great utility for people that have nefarious desires, but the account also gives you access to the adapt homework system, and we do want to provide some protection associated with the corpus of questions that we have there. So anyways, Chutney, does that mean that you don't have an account yet? You're just creating it right now, or you were just asking about this in general? Okay, sounds groovy. Okay, so let's get things going. Uh, and also, Bowen, do you have an account since you came in a little bit late? A Libre One account in order to proceed? Okay, sounds groovy. No worries. I just want to make sure that I didn't leave people behind in this conversation. It's understandable. I just finished office hours a few minutes before we discussed, before we started here. Okay, so where are we? We created a conductor page. It is bare bones because there's nothing in there other than saying it's a conductor page. The point of this is to act as a project management tool. In fact, it's the only OER dedicated project management tool, to my knowledge, out there. And it gives you the ability in order to do many things. One of them is to create an empty book that we're going to be remixing of it. But it gives you the ability in order to manage team members, so you can add people to the team if you know their names. It gives you the ability in order to build a timeline that you can actually use in order to be able to evaluate progress. That could be a Gantt view or a calendar view. It gives you a peer review infrastructure to facilitate reviewing. It gives you accessibility infrastructure in order to guide um, accessibility aspects in the construction of your books. And once we actually create the book, there's going to be a pink entry in here that's going to be the AI co-authoring tools. And that's exceedingly powerful in order to bring books up to the standards that we need them to be in order to compete with commercial for-profit entities. So, okay. What I want you guys to do is to build an empty book. There's a green button right here that says create book. So I want you to create the book. And it just asks you what library you're going to create it in, because each library is unique. I'm going to create it in chemistry because chemistry is the best field of study out there that we can all agree to. And I'm using the same title as the project page as the book, and I just create this. Now, what I'm doing when I'm doing this is I'm creating an empty template for a book in what we call the workbench. The workbench is the protected area outside of the bookshelves, which is where we host our books. That is not meant for public consumption, although you could open up some parts of the book for public consumption, which was a question that it was in the chat here. But the key point is that you do all your work in the bookshelves, in the workbench, and then when you are happy, or at least happy enough in order to move the book into the bookshelves, you request for it to be published, which is this button right here. At that process, at that point, we take over, we review the book, we send some bots through the book to handle accessibility issues, standardization, give you some guidance in terms of how the structure is put together, and tell you what some of the consequences might be from the book. For example, some LMSs don't like just 2 levels of a book. And if you have multiple levels like units, chapters, sections, and maybe subsections like exercise and that, they may be a little more peculiar when they are brought into the LMS that's specifically Canvas than it is with other LMSs like Blackboard and such like that. So anyways, this is the book. It still doesn't really tell me much about that. I do want to mention a couple things on the conductor page, although it was discussed in more detail yesterday by Justin. You have threaded conversations, so you can come in and have a discussion of the thread. If this is just for you, and you're just a single person working on it, this is just a convenient way in order to keep track of the emails that are applicable for this discussion. If you have multiple people on the team, this is really convenient in order to make sure you preserve a discussion around specific aspects. And then you can revisit that, whether it's a week after the discussion or it's a year after the discussion when you've forgotten everything that's out there. The idea is to take the stuff that's oftentimes lost in emails and bring it together here in order to do it. And as you actually paste things onto here, it will send an email to everybody else on the team. So you're still using the emails as a mechanism in order to communicate, but you can at least preserve that information right here. You also have the ability in order to upload assets. That's not important for remixing, but you may have a slide deck that's connected to your homework, connected to your textbook that you created, and this is a way in order to do it. Or you may have some document that you only want the team to internalize and have access to facilitate them. And lastly, you have tasks that you can assign tasks saying, task 1 might be chapter 1, and this person does it, chapter 2, and things like that. Again, the point of here is to facilitate a management infrastructure around the book and moving it forward. But since the topic of this conversation is remixing, not management, let's go into that. Now, what you'll notice is after you created your book, instead of that green button, you now have a open project link. That's a link that goes to your book itself. So it goes to the library and goes specifically to the workbench where your empty book was created. And the empty book here doesn't look like anything because I'm not signed in. So this gray bar here, I want to be black. So I'm just going to press sign in here in order to be able to do that. It's not an automatic process, although at some point we'll make it automatic. So this turns black, and this is what my book looks like. Doesn't look terribly impressive. It has front matter, it has back matter, and it has an empty chapter. I can look at the contents by going under contents here and see what the structure is of this book, which has the stuff that we have for the front matter, and all front matters on our book have at least these 4 pages. You could add more if you want a preface, a forward, about this book, introduction, whatever you want, you can add it into there. And then we have back matter, which includes an index, a glossary, and detailed licensing. And I'd love to be able to talk about these things in more detail, but I may not have time in order to go about doing that. However, Ms. Garcia's hand is up, so how can I help you?
Can I show you the elements that are missing? Like,
Sure,
um,
sure.
can I share? May I share
Yeah, I
this?
think you should be able to take the screen.
Okay,
Otherwise, let me stop the screen, stop the share, and let you
let's
do so.
see. Um, okay, let's see. See here.
Okay.
Well, first of all, it came out in Spanish.
So
I
so
don't know how I did that, but then
yeah,
I don't
so
see.
first you put this on the Espanol library.
Yeah.
And the Espanol library is not meant as Spanish as a language, as instruction. It's meant as OER that's in Spanish. So you can find a chemistry book in here or a physics book in here. That may not be what you
Oh,
want, but
okay.
but that doesn't change anything. We could keep on going on with what we were doing.
Okay, so is where did I go wrong? So I don't
You
see the
you
same
you actually
tools.
didn't go wrong. What you see on the black bar is different than what I see in the black bar.
Yeah.
Okay. We have reduced the features there in order to make sure that you have less opportunity in order to go awry uh, by forcing you to go down different pathways. So don't worry about that. We're not even going to be talking about that today. Tomorrow, when we talk about editing, that's when those things matter. So how do you access the editor, which you have a button right there for accessing the editor, and the page options right there. Everything else you're going to be using the remixer in order to do, and that's again the topic we're doing. So you're perfectly cool so far.
Okay.
So
All right. Thanks.
no worries. Um, so okay, I got the right. So the goal of the remixer, which is what we're going to be pulling up in a moment, is to facilitate as easy as possible the construction of a book using existing content that we already have. And the philosophy that we have is that the larger the corpus of content that we have, the larger it gets, the less pain it takes for someone to create a book that fits their exact needs. In other words, the if it gets big enough, you'll be only limited by your imagination in terms of how you want to restructure things. And such. But we need a corpus while we have an impressive size. We need something that's 10 to 20 times bigger before we get to that sort of hypothetical level. And that's going to be a while in order to be able to do so. Although OER in general has been advancing quite rapidly in the last few years. So we'll see how far that exponential growth happens. So nonetheless, I just wanted to show you what this book is, how it's set up and structured. But we're not going to be focusing on the actual book part. We're going to be focusing on the remixer. So let's go back to the conductor page. And that's what that button means. What I care about is this button right here. And this is what I want you guys to click, which is the remixer. So if I click on the remixer, it's going to pull up your book in the remixer automatically. It'll take a little moments off here. We're going to be updating the remixer sometime in the near future, but this right here is the general argument. And the intent of the remixer, again, is to facilitate easy remixing of the corpus of content that we have. Because we have so much content, it can be easy to get lost into what we are doing. So this is the top. Mine looks a little bit different than yours. I really should switch to a demo account here. I apologize for using my administrative account. So you don't have like this option right here. But otherwise, and this might be a different color, black or purple. I'm not sure what color your version is, just to show that you are slightly different than us. But what really matters, and ignore these things here, is this right here. We have two blocks. We have the block that's the library block and the block that's the remix block. The library block for you will only have these top three things: campus bookshelves, which is our central bookshelves, and learning objects. These other three things you don't have. So don't worry about the fact that mine looks different than yours, at least for the sake of this conversation here. And this gives you the ability to go through any of the libraries. So if I went to engineering, I would see those three books, and I could parse through the bookshelves. So here's the public bookshelves. I can go into biological engineering. I can then look at this book dealing with alternative fuels from biosources. I can then look at the chapters of that book. I can then look at the sections of that book. And these are just parsing through. Again, 1.5 million pages that you can parse through in order to do so. On the right-hand side is my book, the one that I created, the template, which consists of front matter, back matter, and the first chapter. First chapter is just an empty page right there. All that remixing 90% of what you're doing is this: coming over here, clicking the button, dragging this into there and there. That's it. 90% is dragging and dropping. I want this chapter, I pop it in here. I want this chapter in applied programming, in MATLAB modeling, and I want chapter 7, and I want to bring it right there. That's it. And it was meant to be as easy as possible. There are a few features on the remixer that changes things around. But before I go into that, I want to talk about the bigger issue of how you remix. Not the drag and drop, because everybody can do that reasonably easily. The issue is you have 1.5 million pages of content. Which pages do you do? You need to have a game plan. And this requires parsing through the library using, for example, the commons in order to find books and say which books are applicable or are interesting for what I'm doing. Uh, Then you want to create what's called a remixing map. Now, before I talk about a remixing map here, I want to just basically say, if you are saying something along the lines of, I want to build a book that resembles 90% of OpenStax, but I want to remove some chapters and I want to add a few chapters. That right there is a remixing map. You already have a game plan, and you're saying you're following the organization of the book. Well, let's see. Let me pull up the chat. Okay, that's fine and dandy. Some people do a great variety of, let me phrase that, build a book from a variety of different sources. And they need to evaluate what the source is. So we argue that you need to create what we call a remixing map. So I'm going to go up here. I'm going to click on this button here, and it's going to pull to a page. Fortunately, it should be pulling. Okay, it's going to pull to a page that's in our construction guide. That's specifically in chapter 7, which is remixing of existing. So it's a remixing guide. And this right here is a remixing map. A remixing map tells you what pages in existing books do we want to grab and put in what order for our book. And a remixing map's utility is great before you've remixed, and after you've remixed, doesn't matter. It's useless anymore. It could be written on toilet paper, and it could be just as good as if it were written on a piece of paper or written on a Google Doc or written on a spreadsheet. It doesn't matter. But these are examples of what people have done. I'm going to click to this one because this is the one that I actually like a lot. And this was from Lubbock Christian University, and this is an introductory chemistry class. So something between the context, the chemistry and context that was discussed before, and my general chemistry class that I taught earlier on today. And they came in and they say, well, they like the book that we had put together, which was based off of Tro's textbook. It's what we call a text map. It's basically saying we took the textbook structure and we built an OER book to mirror it. And that's meant in order to facilitate easy adoption of OER because you're not changing the structure behind that. You can make a text map. That's perfectly fine. And that gives you the structure of what you want to do. Now, this was made in a spreadsheet. You can actually download the Excel sheet right here if you like. And it has 2 columns here. They're important. This is double up because it didn't have multiple pages. One right here was the book that they are creating. This is yellow. This is the equivalent. Let me pull up the remixer. This is the equivalent of the right column on the remixer. So they made chapter 1, which has 1.1 to 1.10. Chapter 2 has 2.1 to 2.6. They structure it however they want. But they want chapter 1.1 of their book to be taken 1.1 of this text map that we created. And 1.2, they want it to be 1.2. Their 1.3, now they want it to be taken from 2.5 of that book. Again, capitalizing on the fact that they are not encumbered by the structure of this book. They could create whatever they want. And you can see that they are start to restructure, and they took a lot of chapter 2 and they made it into their chapter 1. That fits their needs. That's what remixing provides. That's what OER provides. Then they go to chapter 2, and now they grabbed some of chapter 4 and chapter 6 off of here. But you could see a little bit later on, maybe it's a little bit on this side here, they start to grab things from different books and say, okay, they want 11.4 of this Brown and LeMay text map that they want for their section 11.6. So this is one version of a text map. Now, I may mention here that it doesn't take a subject matter expert to remix. So the ability of remixing and dragging things back and forth, like I mentioned here, doesn't require instructors to do. Uh, in fact, there are some campuses in which they have the instructors create the text map of how they want to organize it and hand it off to the OER project team, and they remix the book. So the subject matter experts, the faculty, don't need to know about dragging and dropping and restructuring these things and learning about the issues that this has. Even though I think it's relatively straightforward, it still takes some mental capabilities in order to be able to go through that. And speaking as a faculty member, I have almost no mental capabilities beyond what I can do at the immediate moment for what's going on here. So this is one mechanism in order to try to relieve the pain associated with remixing. So anyways, this again is one version of a remixing map. I personally prefer just to write it down on a piece of paper. It works just as well for me. And then after it's done, I recycle the paper because it has no utility anymore. The other thing that I'll mention about making a remixing map is it doesn't have to be perfect. It doesn't have to be comprehensive. It just has to be enough to get things started. And you can always go back and remix and then change it and remix and change it and remix and keep on going through the process until you are happy with it. So don't get stuck with the thing is it has to be perfect the first time around. It doesn't. So anyways, this is the book. And let's say I want to build this thing. And I want everyone to pull up the remixer and give me a thumbs up that you have the remixer available and you're ready to rock. Got a couple thumbs. Couple more in the chat. Neil asks, is there any advantage for having a remixing map once you have finished the harvesting the content? To me, no. It's carries no utility. Now, if you know that you're going to be grabbing most of the content from one book that you just want to tweak it, you don't need to build a remixing map. But the key point is that you can't drive a car without knowing where you're going. It's the same thing here.
And then the remixer keeps track of where everything came from too, right?
Yeah, so. Yeah, we'll get into that. Yeah, we still haven't. I said we did 90% of the remix. There's a couple more steps involved in it. Joy, if you don't have learning objects, that may mean you're on a library that doesn't have learning objects. There are a couple libraries that don't have learning objects. I think business doesn't have learning objects, and maybe one of the other ones. We just haven't flushed out that repository of content.
I just have a list of the books in Spanish.
Well, that's your problem. Not your problem.
Can I go back?
Yeah.
Can I go back somehow?
And no. Just click right here and go to a different thing. So, what's the topic of your book?
Spanish.
As a language.
As a language, though. Okay. So, but I have here just textbooks in Spanish, like
that's
humanities, arts.
You chose an incorrect library. That's fine. Yeah. Okay.
Can I switch libraries? No.
Could create another project and book, I guess.
You could do that. I can do things. I can do everything. I think you may not be able to do that. Why don't you create a new project and do it in humanities? That's where we have our library. It doesn't really matter. It just matters what your default is here. You would just be able to select humanities here, and then you would identify that you want to go into language. So it really doesn't matter much, but feel free to make a new conductor project and then go through the process that we just did. So you are in Spanish, and then you have a range of these things. We have too many Spanish books, and we need to partition them into sub bookshelves. Dealing here's grammar, and here is cultural, and here is normal Spanish books. I'm not entirely sure how to structure that. So, anyways, let's. I'll let you focus on that for now and just restructure it. But since we have this book open, let's say I want to grab this chapter. Right now, we do this chapter by chapter instead of an entire book. and we will change that at one point, but I can just come in and say, I want this chapter, I want this chapter, I want this chapter, and just bring it in, but I don't want that chapter, and I could skip over and bring it all over. When I did that, it brings over the chapter and brings over all the pages below the chapter right there. Now, before we actually go to the next process, I do want to mention something here, and that is the color coding. So you have actually 3 color codes here. One's green, which means that when we save this to the server, it will create those pages. So I'm creating new pages up with the content that was already organized here. Things that are orange means that I will be changing the title of that page. So it already exists. I'm just changing the title. And the last one is if I try to delete a page, it will do red and do a strikeout. So if I try to delete this thing, it will do a red and strikeout once I save it. It doesn't do it until I save it. So it's just like writing an email. You don't send the email until you send the email. You press the send button. The same thing happens here. Now, before we actually do that, I just wanted to talk about one thing that looks a little strange to you, but that will be your friend, your best friend. And that is, if I scroll up here, this button, this option right here called the auto number. The auto number makes things convenient so that it will put a number in front of the chapters and put a double number in front of the next level down and triple number on the next level down. And it makes it so that if you rearrange these things, you will change all the numbers automatically. So if I take this chapter 3 and I move it up here above chapter 1, now it changed the numbers. So this K was 3 and now the K is 1. And it changes all the other numbers connected to it. That makes it easier for you to slice and dice and add new topics and add new chapters, and it changes all the numbering automatically for the chapters and the pages below that. What is really convenient is that if the code is written properly here, and it may take some time in order to do that, it will change the equation numbers, the table numbers, and the figure numbers correspondingly. So the point behind there is in order to make it so it's not painful to remix. And I can't imagine anything more painful than having to change numbers all the time, over and over again, every time you tweak and say, and you come up and you say, well, I would like to have a introductory chapter right here, or I want to add a new page at the beginning, and then start dealing with numbering everything after that. So that's what the auto number comes in. I can deactivate the auto number, and then when I rearrange it, it keeps the numbering as if it were normal written down. So I don't have to use that if I don't want to. Now, I'm going to ignore these things, and I just want to talk about saving. So saving is a 2-step process. So I can click on this button, and this comes into a page that tells me what it's going to do when I save. So it's a summary page. It's going to make 121 pages. It's going to move 0 pages. It's going to rename 1 page. I can click on it. It's actually going to rename detailed licensing in the back matter. Don't worry about that. And I'm going to delete 1 page, and that was the empty pages off of there. Before I actually do this, I want to make this a little bit smaller of a course because it takes time in order to be able to do this. And then I do save to server. And that's the second step. And now it's creating the books, creating the pages that I bring in. And that's most of the remixer. It creates not just the empty pages, but it brings the content that you'd see on the original page over into your book. So when we go to conferences and we present these things, we have a little build your book in 10 minutes sort of deal where a faculty member sits down and says, this is what the book I want. We go bang, 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 here you go. And then you're ready to rock in your class. So so Kaylee, the remixer is meant for manipulating pages and only pages. The content on the pages requires editing. So it's the second tool that we have. And this is not too dissimilar from the computer that you have right now, right? You are moving files around on the file system, but when you want to edit the content in the files, you have to use a different approach for doing so, depending upon the nature of the file. Same thing happens here. So I've gone through this thing. It goes through it step by steps, and it creates these things. And if I were to click on the book right here, I click that button down below. I can also go back to the conductor page and click it right there. Here is my book, Football is Life. It happens to be Spanish, just for coincidence, even though there's a quote from Ted Lasso from a Mexican football player. But anyways, and this is my book. I can go into any of the sections here and take a closer look at it and such. Now, this is from a Lumen Learning book. It has a bit of structure that's a little bit more peculiar. But I do want to mention one final thing, and this is the one that's going to be a little bit confusing. So, and it dovetails into the editing conversation. So I look at this page, and this page here comes from an original source that's written down here. But I'm going to tell you that the content that you see on this page is actually not stored on this page. Now, at this point, you're going to say, I'm gaslighting you in some way or the other. It's not true. If I were to edit this page, it gives me a little block that tells me the content is really stored somewhere else. I can click on here, and I can see the actual content of the source page. The argument behind here is that if I'm not going to be editing this page, there's no reason to duplicate this page. I can just basically keep it the way it is, and then I'm ready to go. That right there is called transclusion. It's an old term. And when you have a little icon up here, that represents that you have a transcluded page. Now comes in the question that who mentioned it? Someone asked for editing. That Kaylee asked us, what do you do when you want to edit the content on the page? Again, that's not remixing. It is editing the content off here. And you can't edit a transcluded page because it's stored somewhere else. But you can fork the page using the forker under the options. That will effectively make it so it's copied into my page, into my book. And then I have the ability to go in and start to modify it. And then I go into editing and do various things connected to that. But again, that's the topic of the editing chapter. We're just dealing with remixing. So like I said, 90% of what you're doing as a remixer, I'm going to revise this book, 90% of what you're doing as a remixer is basically dragging and dropping. But I would argue that's the functional form. Really, you spend more time looking through the corpus to find the content that you want than the actual remixing. And once you're comfortable with remixing, you just come in and just slice and dice and reorganize things however you want. I want this, I want this, I want this, and you're able to rock. So you have the skills right now in order to be able to do that. If you want to be able to look at the construction guide at chapter 7, there's a link at the remixer in order to do that. I'm going to paste that into the chat. And it goes into the details that we did here. There are multiple videos on our YouTube channel, and this will also be posted on our YouTube channel once we get it uploaded. That will go through this process again. But once you actually play with it, it's relatively straightforward in order to be able to do. So I'm going to leave it here. If there are any questions or concerns, I'm happy in order to address it, since there's a few minutes before Coalinga College is going to be introducing their activities on things. I hope you are not daunted by remixing. The remixer makes your life a lot easier and a lot more powerful than having to do these things in a manual way. In fact, I have no idea how I would do this in a manual way, because it would just be a really painful process in order to be able to try to keep track of these things in that way. So. Looks like no one has any questions. I do love to talk, as you probably have noticed. So I hope that you have a good day. Thank you for attending our little meeting here. Yes, Ms. Garcia.
Yeah, I waited so 'cause it might not interest anybody. I just want to learn how to switch libraries because I did open a whole new project and it shows up as the same library.
Well, when you create the project, it asks you what library you want it to be in. Did you check humanities?
No, I had two other projects there that I created before, and I had chosen humanities, but now they don't show up like that.
Why don't you feel free to send me an email, because I have to give this
Okay.
Zoom
Sounds
session
good.
over off of that, and we can actually address it. I will also mention we have office hours from Tuesdays to Thursdays from 9 to 10 o'clock Pacific time at zoom.libretext.org. And I'm pasting it into the chat here. And we're happy in order to help anyone that comes on in order to master these things.